Okay, we are live. Great. Let's see. Monica, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. You have some information that I'm so excited to know about the relationship and intimacy sexpert. That is so good and so necessary. But first, I just really wanted to know, you said you're married. How long have you been married and when did you meet your spouse?
We're just about to celebrate our 19th wedding anniversary, but
Wow.
we've known each other for a little over 20 years. We
Okay.
have four children and two businesses. So,
Wow. Four children and two businesses. So did you have your children back to back?
well, the first two are 3 years apart, then 2 years apart, then 3 years apart again. So when we got married, we started our first business together,
Okay.
and I ran that with him. We did it together until I had my third baby.
Okay, your
And
third baby.
then I pulled myself out of the business. I was like, listen, you either need to hire people to replace me or
Okay.
check me into the funny farm.
Yes. So
So,
I'm interested in knowing how that was. You were running a business with two children.
yeah.
How did you balance all of that? Like, did you let your children go to daycare or were you some of those, who wasn't really with
You
the
know,
daycare?
we were lucky. We ran the business out of the back of his mom's house. His mom has a big shop area. And so especially when we were first starting out, we just ran it out of the back of the shop.
Mhm.
And then I was able to do a lot of things from home as our family grew. But
Mhm.
we had our local business. And then my husband also had an office that he ran in Texas, which is, several states away. And
Mhm.
so it when it got to be like payroll deadlines and I was like nursing a baby and people get really
Mhm.
grumpy when you don't get them their paychecks on time, and I was
Mhm.
dealing with two different states. I was just like, I can't do this anymore. So
Right. What business was that?
he runs a residential and commercial pest control business. So we
Oh,
were running
wow.
several
Okay.
pets, and I had a lot of employees and a lot of things that would happen. And we eventually kind of slowly, as I had more kids, would kind of hire people to do the different things. But the last thing I was doing was all of the accounting and payroll and things like that.
All the administrative stuff.
Yeah, and so with those kinds of deadlines though, and
Mhm.
trying to figure out payroll in two different states and nursing a baby and having a busy toddler, and it was just a little too much for me. So that Christmas we joke
Mhm.
I got an accountant and a bookkeeper for Christmas.
Okay, come
It
on.
was the best Christmas.
Seriously. So I wanted, because I'm interested in knowing a little bit about this. Were you nervous to continue having kids? Like some people want to go into business and they just think about how much, time it might take away from the business if they have children right now. If they have one, that's fine. But if they have two, I'm kind of scared. Did you have any of those anxieties?
Not anxieties about having kids. I mean, it's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. And I just
Yeah.
did the best that I could,
Mhm.
with what we had. And my husband and I worked very well together, even though we're totally opposite, which is really interesting. Most of the decisions that we make and things like that are very different from each other. We're very complementary.
Mhm.
But we just juggled it. We just did it until we couldn't do it anymore. And so
Mhm.
then I did stay home with the kids, and we had our fourth. And it wasn't too long before I realized I needed my own kind of creative outlet. Like my husband
Okay.
was running the business, and
Mhm.
I helped here and there with things. But I kind of wanted my own thing, and so I started this little crafting boutique from my
Okay.
house. It was kind of like when my kids were napping or asleep, and it was just something I could do with my hands and use my creativity that grew into a big business that I eventually sold. But we did
Wow.
learn how to juggle, businesses and
Mhm.
kids and family life and all of the messy in between. We learned some very hard lessons during that period of time. Don't get me wrong. But for me, it was a creative outlet. It was a way for me to express myself, have a little bit of my own kind of
Mhm.
money that I didn't have to account for
Right.
anywhere else. It kind of gave me a little bit of a purpose besides wiping butts and,
Exactly. And what made you sell that bow business, if that's what it's called?
yeah. So I eventually decided to sell that to go back into my first love, which was working with couples. So when I graduated way back 20 years ago from college, I wanted to be a marriage and family counselor. I wanted to help couples. And so this boutique business was really fun, but it had kind of run its course.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to work with couples. And from what I had learned, juggling two businesses and a lot of babies and all of the things, I knew that entrepreneurs needed help because those are big challenges. And I wish that someone had been there kind of in the beginning times to help me realize, like, you've got to prioritize each other first, and then your
Right.
kids, and then your business, right? And like those
Right.
are the things that I learned, and that's what I coach couples today. So
Wow. So that's very interesting. So since you're a relationship and intimacy expert, do you consider yourself to have a successful marriage?
I do. I mean, no marriage is perfect, but
Mhm.
man, I tell you, my husband and I, we love each other. I always say my husband and I love each other more than any two people on the face of the planet. But I would love to help you feel that way about your own marriage as well.
Right.
So I don't
Right.
think we've
Mhm.
cornered the market on that, but I certainly feel like I got in light of St. Patrick's Day, I got lucky.
Oh, that's good, right? What do you think in your marriage, what was one of the hardest things that you had to overcome?
For me, it was, kind of the issues and baggage that I brought into the marriage, which was a lot of
Okay.
abandonment. I always felt like the bottom was about to drop out. And so a
Mm.
lot of my kind of wounds and my baggage had to do with, I just felt like he was going to up and leave at some point, right? It
Mm.
was, and it was like a lot of me learning that I couldn't control all of the factors, right? So you can
Right.
imagine with all these little babies and businesses, and I couldn't control everything. And so it was a lot of me letting go of control and kind of
Mhm.
facing my fear that, having the perfect life, I wanted to have the perfect life, and I wanted to be in control of all of that. So it's
Right.
kind of like letting go, giving it up to God, and just recognizing that this is my story. My husband and I get to write our love story however we want. And my story doesn't have to be my parents' story or my grandparents' story. And so those were a lot of the challenges that we kind of overcame together.
That's really good. So it was when you started, you were dealing with abandonment issues and you were able to get over that. And as a relationship coach, therapist, counselor, marriage counselor, have you seen that a lot with the women or even men that you work with that they have abandonment issues?
Well, I think everybody comes into the marriage with some kind of
Mhm,
wounding, right? So no
mhm,
matter who you are, no matter how perfectly you grew up, there's some sort of wounding that came from either your upbringing or from past relationships. And so abandonment is a big one. These underlying fear of rejection is a big one. Um, there's all kinds of trauma and wounds, but we all have them. Like that's
right.
part of our development and growing up
Mhm,
and learning how to kind of overcome this wounding that we got in our childhood. Everybody has it, right? And
right.
so the thing that I love working through with couples is recognizing the negative patterns of interaction that they've created in their relationship. So there's
Mhm,
when there's wounds and triggers, we create these patterns of interaction that we get stuck in as couples. So typically the big three are kind of this attack pattern, attack withdraw pattern, or withdraw. Those are the three big ones. And
Okay.
our wounds and our triggers and our behaviors get us caught in these negative cycles where people feel like we need better communication, or they don't feel loved, or they feel very disconnected, or they start to feel like roommates. All of these are symptoms of the patterns of interaction that they've formed in their relationship. And
Hmm.
it's not until they can step back away a little bit and recognize those patterns that they can break out of them and create new, really beautiful patterns and heal those wounds with each other. So, I mean, it's one of the most difficult thing that I
Hmm.
do with the couples that I work with, but it's also the most beautiful and the most rewarding.
Right. So when you overcame your own issue, what methods did you use to overcome that?
Well, mine was very, very, very painful. I dealt with crippling anxiety. I was so afraid that my husband was going to leave me that I pushed him away all the time, right? And I developed this
Mm.
debilitating anxiety. And it wasn't until I was able to face my biggest fear, which was literally divorce, my husband walking out, taking the kids and everything that I loved and care about away from me. It wasn't until I faced it, recognized it, and could face it
Mhm.
and accept it. Like that is a
Yeah.
possibility when we get
Mhm.
married and we pledge our lives to each other and we create this life together. It is a possibility that our spouse could choose to leave or something could happen to them, right? And so it was when I faced that head on and I said, okay, if that were to happen,
Yeah.
I would find a way to heal from that, right? And
Yeah.
so it was when I stopped and
Wow.
said, this is the worst case scenario. This is what keeps me paralyzed with fear. And even if this were to happen, I could keep going. And
That
it was
is so
like
good.
this long process of healing that really allowed me to go on and be like, I'm not afraid of this anymore. This could happen, but it's not
Wow.
going to. And so I just live my life in the best way that I possibly can.
That is so good because in that moment, you took responsibility that it was you who was the issue. A lot of people, if they're thinking that my husband might, they'll be blaming them. Are you doing something? It's not them.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
when we're able to face that fear, we're free.
Yes.
We're free, and I believe a lot of people struggle with that. Is he going to leave me? Is And the thing is, what if he does? That's not your source. That's not where your identity lies. And sometimes I think people get into relationships because that's where their identity lies. They have said, this is what's going to make my life better. And it become idolatry. So I believe that you set yourself free from idolizing marriage,
Mhm.
from idolizing marriage and idolizing maybe even your husband. And that idolatry is what traps us. And the fact that you were able to face it, what if? And sometimes that's my prayer. I say, we think about people who we love. We don't want them to die. We know everyone's going to die or leave one day, and then we're like, oh God, please protect them. But what if it's their time? We pray for protection, but the real prayer is, give me peace for when or if this does happen, because I can't control everything. So give me peace.
Yeah, you just like hit the nail on the head. Like we try so hard to control everything and
Hmm.
it's not until we let go of that control and recognize that we can only control our story, right? We
Hmm.
have so much more control than we think we do when we're trying to control everything, but it's not until we give up that control that we actually get to create our own reality, just controlling what we have, which is ourselves, which is really, really beautiful. And how you said that, yes.
Yes. So I want to get into the relationship and intimacy sexpert. What is that? How did you even know how to become an intimacy sexpert? That sounds good. Sounds needed.
So I'm obsessed with marriage, right? And strong relationships. And one of the most important aspects, and the only thing that separates your marriage relationship from any other relationship, is that sexual intimacy, right? And so many couples struggle with that because, I can be really intimate with you because you're my friend, and intimate with my kids. But the only thing that separates those relationships from the one I have with my husband is this physical intimacy that we get to like partake in together, right? And so many marriages struggle with that aspect of their relationship. And so they become roommates, or they become, enemies, or their marriage falls apart, right? So like those are kind of the choices if you don't embrace that sexual aspect of your relationship.
Right. What if they're not having sexual relations because one person doesn't like it? How would you come in and help that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's very, very layered. Like we'd have to find out, why don't you like it, right? There's so many things that could be playing into that idea, but so much of it has to do with stories, just like our fears about our relationship. It's the story you're telling yourself about what sexual intimacy is, maybe your experiences. So it's a lot of untethering all of that to
Okay.
find out really the root of, what is keeping you from
Okay.
sharing yourself completely with your partner.
Okay. So you don't really go over maybe it's different positions and
No, in fact, when I started, I thought I'll just teach people how to have great sex and the problem will be
Oh.
solved, right? But the truth is that doesn't really work, right? I can teach you all the techniques in the whole wide world, but if the emotional and physical intimacy isn't there, you can be hanging from the chandeliers and still hate it, right?
You're so funny. Hanging from the chandelier. Yeah, you could actually. So, what kind of things have you found are underlying conditions of why the great sexual relationship is not there?
Well, a lot of it just has to do with our programming, what we learned growing up. A lot of us grew up in households where sex wasn't talked about or where it was shamed. And so the first thing we have to do is get rid of that programming and reprogram with a healthy idea of what sexuality and connection is. And then we have to really combine emotional and physical intimacy, because you really can't have one without the other. And so once we start to kind of get rid of those false ideas and kind of the shame or guilt around different ideas around our sexuality, we start to develop, because our sexuality is part of our wholeness. Just like, you have to develop your intellect by going to school. You have to
Right.
develop your physicality by working out, going to the gym, learning different sports, right? You have to develop your sexuality just like any other part of yourself. And so once we kind of parse that out and we find out what you think about sex, what you've already been programmed about it, and then we start to develop it and grow it just like anything else.
Right. I mean, that's really good. So what have people who went to you, what's the review? How long does it take them to, I guess, become great in their sexual lives again? And what do
It
they
depends on where
say?
they start, right? I mean,
Okay.
it definitely depends on where you're starting from. But
Mhm.
typically, I work with couples, high achieving couples, entrepreneurial couples, that
Mhm.
they generally have a good relationship, but they either struggle with prioritizing each other, making time
Okay.
for each other, or just being able to untether themselves from the stress of running a business, or
Mhm.
running in that rat race, right? To be
Right.
able to really connect and enjoy each other. So my program is called Training in the Art of Sexbionage, and it's like
Okay.
a whole spy program, right? So espionage is
Mhm.
spying and lying on your enemies, right? So that's what espionage spies do.
Mhm.
But sexpionage spies become very skilled in communicating and connecting with their partner in crime, creating an unbreakable bond. So there's lots of innuendos and there's lots of, bond
Mhm.
references, spy references, but we learn the skills of relationships and how to
Right.
build a really firm foundation of emotional intimacy first. A lot of people are surprised. It's a 12-week program and we don't even
Okay.
start talking about sex. We don't even
Mhm.
bring it up until week 8 or 9.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's a lot of setting that foundation of friendship and trust and safety before we ever even start talking about the physical aspects of sex.
Right. And I have one more question before I let you go. I do want to know what your website is, and while you're tell or answering this question, telling me your website, I want you to answer this question. What do you do about the maybe it's one spouse, maybe it's the wife or the husband, they really have admitted to themselves that they need your help. They want to save their marriage, but the other spouse is like, we don't need that. You know, how
Yeah,
do
that
you
happens a
how do
lot.
you
Yes.
address that? How do you
Yeah.
address that?
So
And what's your website real quick before you say that?
my website is www.onthebrightersideofmarriage.com. So
Okay.
just
Go
on
ahead.
the brighter side of marriage.
Okay.
But yeah, so I always say you can change your marriage on your own.
Mhm.
Two heads are better than one. I
Mhm.
typically work with couples together,
Mhm.
but usually there's one that's a little more excited than the other. But my program is really, really fun and it's meant to involve both partners.
Mhm.
And there's dates throughout.
Okay.
One of the biggest secrets, I think, is date night. Like it sounds so simple, but most people don't do it. And so
Yeah.
weekly date nights is like the minimum requirement. You have to have both
Yeah.
spouses willing to go on a weekly date night for my program to work. So I take couples on a case by case basis. They do apply to work with me. And if they're not at the level to work with me, then I have lots and lots of other relationship experts, depending on what their biggest challenges are that I refer out to. But when they're ready to really step up their sexpionage game and learn how to become spies, then they can come and work with me. So typically it takes both of them. Not they don't always go through the program, but minimum requirement, they have to be willing to go out on weekly date nights together.
That actually sounds really fun. It does. It sounds fun, and it sounds like,
That's how you
this
complete
is
your missions, right? You
yeah,
mission
right.
during the week, and then you go on your date night to complete your missions.
I
It's
like that. That sounds like so much fun. Um, you know, Sexpionage. How would even anybody know that this is an option, because this is like creative therapy.
It's
It's
true, and I always say I'm not a therapist, like, I never
right.
wanted to be a therapist. I went back to school, actually, this is part of my story. I went back to school to become a
Mhm.
therapist, and I got a year into that program, and I couldn't do it. I was like, "I don't
Mhm.
wanna wait until couples are, like,
Right.
the last straw. Like, I wanna help them before
Right.
they ever get to that point." And so it's definitely not therapy, but it is a lot of
Mhm.
skills. It's a lot
Right.
of coaching,
Mhm.
um, and it's just, I mean, it's couples who know that by investing in their relationship,
Okay.
investing in themselves, that they will improve all the other aspects of their life. They
Right.
will become better parents, they will become better business owners, they will
Mhm.
become better people in general, because that relationship is really, the flow point of everything else.
Right, it is. It is. And that is that what you like when you said you only work with high achieving couples? Uh, can you just clarify what you mean is high
Sure.
achieving?
It's couples that have big goals and big
Okay.
dreams. They know they're sent here to earth to accomplish big things, right?
Mhm.
And so, but sometimes that keeps them from connecting with each other because they both have these big
Mhm.
goals, or one of them has these big goals and they feel like the other one isn't, right? And so
Mhm.
it's typically those couples that know that they need to develop these skills and learn these things so that they can keep going in the same direction with each other.
Yes, I mean that was really good. Monica, I really appreciate you for giving us your time, explaining what a relationship and intimacy sexpert does, what one is. I mean, it seems like fun. I feel like I almost want to take the course.
Let's do
Um,
it.
yeah, right. No, seriously. And so stay connected. It's plenty of people in this group who I know need your help. And you have a podcast.
Yes. It's called On the Brighter Side Marriage for Entrepreneurs. So, on the podcast, I typically I either interview high achieving couples who have
Okay.
learned different lessons as they
Mhm.
juggle marriage, family life, and entrepreneurship, or experts that come in and talk about different aspects of, or I'll teach about different aspects of how to juggle and manage those things because it's hard, right? It's and the easiest thing is to leave the marriage for last, right? Because
Mhm.
when we own a business, our clients and our customers, they pay us. So we show up.
Yeah.
Our kids, they can't wipe their own butts or make their own food or
Yeah.
drive themselves places. So we show up for them because they need us. And our spouses often get left to last. So we flip those things.
Wow.
We teach entrepreneurs how to prioritize their marriage so that everything else gets better.
That is so needed and that is so good. Wow, thank you. Look, I'm over here thinking about my own life. No, seriously.
Right?
I
You
think
should get your own program. It's so much fun.
yeah, it sounds like fun. But anyway, thank you so much, Monica. And I look forward to even maybe coming on your podcast one
I
day.
would love to.
Yeah, let's stay connected and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much.
All right, bye bye.